it play and call it work.
Hi there, and welcome to this week's Sit and Talk with me, Kris. Next week will be MiniWarGamer Steve, and so for those of you who want to have any questions addressed to him, simply put in the comments at Steve, and then ask your question, or if it's a response for something I've mentioned in this video today, then just have it at Kris. I think we're all kind of getting into the step of the of how this all works out, but for some of you guys who are just tuning into this show, yeah, just simply have it addressed, your question addressed to whoever you really want to have it addressed to, either Kris or Steve. And then once it's Steve's video, and then who follows him. And yeah, I'm rambling. Let's just get right into these questions. Where are we? Chosen one, Kris. Since you have a huge green screen in your office, have you ever taken a video of yourself, say, dancing or in a Superman pose, and then put yourself into space, or a volcano, or a snowy mountain, just for fun? No. A while back when I first was playing with the green screen, not when it was in the office, but we have a couple of them. We can set them up on bars, and it's an actual muslin cloth and muslin cloth. Can't remember. Anyway, and yeah, I was just testing it out and doing silly stuff on it anyway, but lots of fun. And the green screen in my office, I mean, it was initially designed for whenever doing intros or anything like that, or we need to have a permanent kind of setup for green screen work, that it'd just be right here and ready to go kind of thing. So you don't have to set up a big, this big tarp, essentially. It's like 10 feet by 20 feet. It's pretty big. Particular kind of jobs, we probably still need to pull it out, but for most of our work, we don't have to. Orky Benji, Kris, your thoughts on varnish. When is it necessary? Can you give some examples of models you would give a matte, satin, or gloss varnish to? Is it okay to brush on Vallejo varnish if I don't own an airbrush? Okay, well, to answer that end part first, is it okay to brush on Vallejo varnish if you don't own an airbrush? Yes, that's fine. Brush it on. Apply by airbrush. Any which way, yeah, you can apply it. It's fine. It's not going to have any adverse effects. You don't even have to thin it down. If you want to thin it down a bit, feel free to thin it down a bit, even with just a little bit of water. Sometimes with the glaze, Vallejo glaze, if I'm doing it by brush, I'll thin it down just a bit with some water and apply it, and apply multiple streaks so that I get a really smooth, glassy kind of finish. And Vallejo gloss is a lot of fun. If you thin it down just a bit and you apply multiple coats, yeah, you can get a really, really smooth, glassy like finish on a model surface with it. Varnish for me, I don't always varnish a model. A lot of the models that are done for painting tutorials and stuff like that, they don't get a varnish. A lot of my gaming pieces do get a varnish because they're being handled a lot. Like a lot of my 40K and my War Machine models, they have a varnish on them, and typically that's a matte varnish. But oftentimes I will use satin or gloss for a particular effect. When I used to play Tyranids, I used to do a semi-gloss on the like the limbs, and then I'd have a gloss, like many gloss coats on the carapace themselves, and so it gives them this really insect kind of vibe. And Eldar, all my flyers, they all have a gloss coat on them. Gives them that kind of fire engine, Ferrari type feeling. Sports car, goes really fast and really kind of slick. And so when you are talking varnishes, you don't have to necessarily just talk in like the utilitarian type sense that it's simply just to protect the model. It also can be used to finish a model or create a particular feeling or create an effect onto the model. Like I mentioned before with the Tyranids, using gloss on the carapace, gives them that insect kind of slick, kind of slimy kind of feeling, right? Versus on an Eldar where it feels very shiny and, fire engine and sports car and, So again, it's entirely up to you. Semi-gloss on the flesh helps to give that kind of waxy kind of quality to the model versus just going with a matte varnish over everything. You know, going with a semi-gloss, say on flesh, or you know, even on cloth, so that should be a satin kind of cloth. You know, different kinds of effects, and it's entirely up to you as to how you want to finish your model. Again, it doesn't have to be just straight up just for protection. It can also be to an effect, so that to the viewers they go, "Oh, look at this! Oh, it's got this different kind of effect to it." Again, it can be used for multiple things. Gray Cloak. Kris, hey, how often do you go back through old models or pictures of models you might have and cringe at the old paint job? I started painting at a young age and the poor models I ruined. Thanks for the great tips. I hope Undead Ghoul Flesh might be in the future. Undead Ghoul Flesh, I do believe I've done a few videos on that in the vault. They're already in there. But that was some time ago. Maybe we can revisit it again, do something different. I don't know. As I mentioned before in previous videos, that there are more than one way to show a particular technique or effect, or so maybe it can be revisited. As far as going back through my old pictures of models, I don't have a whole lot of pictures of my models. And some of the old paint jobs, yeah, I mean, I can see where I needed improvement and things like that. I really should dig through my archive and find one of my older models. Now, I don't have the first model I painted, but, I do have some really, really old stuff, some old stuff. And, oh, you know what? Yeah, hold on. This here is probably still one of my oldest models that I have in my possession, and it is a Nurgle Greater Demon. And this guy, he is so darn old, he's still lead when they made their models out of lead. And yeah, he's not the greatest. He was mostly dry brushed. He was painted dark, in dark greens, and you can kind of see there's some dark greens on there, and the red of the flesh, I think it was just left. I think I just built it up from the dark green and built up the red. The dry brushing is kind of like a zenithal style type dry brushing. You see how, there's dark under the recesses and stuff like that. But otherwise, yeah, this is probably the oldest model I have in my possession. And it's heavy. If I whip this at somebody, they'd probably die. They might die. I might get charged with attempted murder or something, because it would just be bad, just throwing something like that at somebody. So yeah, I do have a few models like that where they show some my older. I used to rely a lot on dry brushing. I used to do a lot of dry brushing, and some layering, but otherwise no. To achieve a lot. I used a lot of dry brushing, but sometimes on some models I would get the dry brushing right, where I wouldn't apply quite as many layers of dry brushing, versus sometimes I would do it wrong and I would apply too many layers of dry brushing, and it would just get chalky, and like it would look like like lava rock, or that porous stone that just kind of tons of holes in it. That's how it would look. It just have that kind of really porous kind of texture to it. And that's how you've got too much dry brushing going on a model surface like that. So, yeah, that's something to bear in mind. And when you look back at your models, you go, wow, I really needed some improvement back then. Whitmore Gator. Whitmore Gator? Whitmore Gator. It's a fun name to say. Hi, Kris. Are you going to join in the 30K fun? What pre-heresy chapter would you want to make your army? What has been your favorite 30K chapter to paint so far? Okay. Would I like to join in? Sure, that'd be fun. I'd probably go Imperial Fist or Death Guard, but more likely the Imperial Fist. I like the Imperial Fist, and I don't know. I kind of identify more with, I guess, the good Space Marines rather than the bad Space Marines. I don't know. Like I used to play Chaos way back in the day, and I used to play Black Legion. That was my Chaos Force, and I had a huge force back then. But I don't know, Imperial Fists, yeah, because I mean, like I like the Crimson Fist. Crimson Fists are my favorite Space Marine chapter, just from the look, you know, and the lore, I guess, as well. But you know, and you know, by default, I guess I'd have to side with the chapter that is their progenitor. So, yeah, I'd have to go with Imperial Fists, just by default. Now, what favorite chapter has been fun to paint? Now, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, actually, because I've had a lot of fun painting a lot of these different chapters. And the Thousand Suns, the Pre-Heresy Thousand Suns, has been a lot of fun because it's that metallic red. And I like metallic red. And anytime I get an excuse to paint the metallics and put the candy gloss on top, or the Minotaur paint on top of it, and do an effect like that, you know, I always enjoy. I've been recently doing the Emperor's Children, and I'm kind of liking how that whole color scheme looks. They're really kind of deep, kind of purple with the bright gold, and you got these white elements on them, you know, like the gun or the shoulder pads or, you know, other things like that. I'm really kind of digging their color scheme as well. Who else is a lot of fun? Sons of Horus. Sons of Horus was a fun one, but you're probably better off, if anybody's ever watched the videos, you're probably better off just buying the paint from Forge World instead of mixing that color, because it's a complete pain. It's a complete pain. But otherwise, yeah, I'd have to say Thousand Suns or Emperor's Children have been a lot of fun to paint. Probably edging out 2000 Suns. It's such a cool color scheme. It's just that metallic red. It's just so cool looking, you know. I know a lot of people out there are probably just going to paint their Thousand Suns just red, but you know, take the time or try and get your hands on the metallics and the clear paints to do the effect. You can do the effect by brush. It doesn't have to be just necessarily airbrushed, although airbrushing it does make it very, very easy to do. But it still can be done by paintbrush as well. So don't let that kind of you know, the process of it kind of scare you, because Minotaur ghost tints, they go on by paintbrush, they go on very, very nicely and very evenly as well. They don't really kind of bunch up, especially if you lay it on properly and just kind of tint the surface. Stop, let it dry, hit it again, you know. So hopefully Whitmore Gator, it's fun to say, Whitmore Gator, Whitmore. Where are we? Glover, can I get information that this clip is private? Can anyone see this? Huh? Guess that was something else, I don't know. M Tempests. Hey Kris, or hi Kris. Do you think you could convince Rob to make you an Eldar helmet or a Harlequin's kiss? We need some non-Imperial props. P.S. Well done on the quitting smoking. Stay strong. Name Butcher. Well, thank you. Yeah, and as of recording this, being the something of March, early March, I'm like many weeks, 7, 8 weeks free of that monkey. Yeah. And as far as Rob.
Yes.
The people want you to make me a piece of Eldar equipment.
Eldar equipment?
Yeah, either a helmet or a pistol. Or a
possibly in the future for a build.
Or a Harlequin's kiss. I need a Harlequin's kiss. Not like that, Lee.
Grar.
Or a Harlequin's mask. Yeah, give me one of those drama masks, like with the teardrop and.
We'll talk about it.
No, we'll talk down. He's not going to do it. Tucker Shee, Kris, do you know when you'll be getting around to doing the white scars in your quick tips? I found your series great. So many skill I picked up. 30K white scars on my first army, and I'm going to paint my friend. Joke saying I never choose the easy option. I've been using your World Eaters so far, but I find your techno skills are amazing. Also, do you know an airbrush kit and compressor you would suggest to get? Okay, well, white scars are in the future. White scars, I will be showing it slightly different than how I did the World Eaters, because again, when you look at the two, they're not the same kind of white armor. The white armor on the World Eaters tends to be kind of a cool kind of white, whereas the armor on the white scars tends to be a warmer kind of white. Mainly because I think because of the red trim, and you know the World Eaters has that blue trim on them and stuff like that, right? So, yeah, so that'll be the big difference there. But white scars, yeah, are coming. And as far as airbrush and compressor, well, I mean, I've been using Badger's equipment and stuff for a few years now, and I think they run great. I've been using a Badger Patriot 105. It has been a really, really good brush. I know there's other companies out there, Wada, Pache, there's other companies out there who create really great products. I've no experience with their equipment. I've only ever used the Badger, so I can only speak to that point. And as far as the compressor, we also use a Badger compressor as well. You can find other cheap options out there, but then you got to find your moisture traps, your regulators. Then you got to make sure it's going to fit your airbrush as well. And so, whereas if you buy from one company, you pretty much can just buy a kit, right? And it's not cheap right off the hop. Be warned, you're going to spend probably at least $300 to $400 on a kit, on a compressor and brush. Not to mention that if you want to get into any of the paints, then we're going to require more paints. But if you're going to try and keep it fairly low cost, then you're going to be taking your regular acrylics, you'll be thinning them down a bit, and putting them into the brush. But again, the Badger Patriot 105, it's a really good utility brush. I enjoyed it. I've really, really liked the work I've gotten out of it. It's really good for base coating, varnishing, everything. It's a good utility brush, but when you turn the PSI down, it can still get in there and still, get to some detail areas and get into some nooks and crannies, and, it can still do some of that small work for you as well. Not the tiny, tiny stuff, not line drawing. Well, I can do a little bit of line drawing, but not like lightning, like doing lightning or something like that. It's not, that's kind of outside its realm. The needle's just not sharp enough. You need a finer needle for that. And so, yeah. But yeah, I would recommend a Badger, only because that's all I've ever used. I've never really used any of the other companies' brushes, so I can't really say whether or not, it's crap or not. So, I don't know. Where are we in the comments? Already read that one. DK Vidal. Hi, Kris. I recently bought a Badger Pro 100. There we go. The large gravity pot airbrush. It works amazingly. However, I use the propellant tanks and want to make the switch to a compressor. Are there any you might recommend? Also, love your quick tips. Lame medium with paint save me. I used to use water and paint. And the paint would dry faster. And in your last quick tip, the Sons of Horus armor tip, you mentioned a wet palette. Is that a specific type of palette? I'm not sure or I'm not sure. I assume it helps to keep the paint from drying, but could you explain this? What this is? Haha, I feel lost on that. Okay, mahalo from Hawaii. Mahalo. Mahalo. That's fun. Mahalo. We're having all sorts of fun with words today. Mahalo and Whitmore. Okay, so he picked himself up a Badger Pro, and it's a siphon feed. Yeah, it's got the big paint pot. I think it's a Badger Pro 100. I think it might be. I don't know which one that is actually. I thought it was one of those siphon feed ones, but never mind. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's using the propellant cans to get his airbrushing done, and that's kind of exhausting to even think about, like using those propellant cans, because I've tried them out a few times, and you don't get any consistent pressure for very long. You get maybe about 5 seconds of good consistent pressure, and then the can drops off, and then of course a frost starts to form around the can because the CO2 gets really, really cold, and they're really paid, and you got to have a few of them on hand, really, if you're going to sit down and try and get a paint session in, right? So throw those out, get yourself a compressor. The Badger compressor that we use is the Inspiron. I can't see the name on it, but it's got the well, here you can see here it's got the tank and the motor on it, and it works really well. It's about, I think, 200 a boot 200, and it works really well. It's got the regulator on it, moisture trap. It's got a couple little safety features on it as well. It works really well. It's not quiet at all. So there's no shielding over the motor or anything like that. The motor is just kind of regular kind of compressor kind of motor. But it's got a storage tank on it, which is going to give you much more consistent pressure out. Because I've run with compressors without the storage tanks, and I've run just straight from the compressor. And the motor, you kind of get this little as the motor is generating the pressure constantly out. And you kind of get that little stuttering out of the air. It's very minute, but it's there. And so when you have a storage tank on the compressor, it gives you a much more compressed air. And so once that compression starts to drop a little bit, the motor automatically kicks in and then really tops off that tank. And so it gives you good consistent pressure out of it all the time for as long as you're painting. Mind you, they do get quite warm as the compressor is constantly it keeps kicking in. But again, that's the nature of the game. And if you're going to be painting, or if you're a commission painter and you're going to be working on a lot of models, yeah, you're going to be working that compressor to death. And don't be surprised if she does quit on you, after a year or two, or just consistent work. Especially if your work area is messy and there's dust and all sorts of stuff in the air, and it gets inside the motor, it can mess up that the bushings on the motor. So be mindful of that. Lamaine medium, yeah, I do recommend Lamaine medium in a lot of instances. I still use water to thin my paints occasionally for certain things. If I'm doing like a base coat or something like that, I still use water here and there. But whenever I really need to maintain control while thinning the paint, yes, that's when really you want to use medium. Lamaine medium with Games Workshop paint works really well, because Games Workshop paint is a fairly heavy-bodied paint. It's a fairly thick, greasy kind of paint. And the Lamaine medium is really watery. And so when you thin the paint down with that really watery kind of thinner, it just works really well. Using something like Vallejo's thinner on Games Workshop paint, it gives you a much more kind of it's not quite as thin feeling. It feels a little bit slicker and almost like melted butter kind of. And again, with Vallejo medium, you have to know that when it goes on and it has this murky appearance, it makes that paint kind of take on that murky kind of quality. But when it dries normal. And so you got to know that one as well. And so all these little variables when we're painting and we're mixing and matching different companies' stuff. But really, like Vallejo mediums were designed with Vallejo paints in mind. They weren't designed with Games Workshop's paints in mind. And vice versa, right? So always be on the watch for that kind of stuff. What was the other one? Oh, the wet palette. The wet palette. Now, for those of you who watched that Sons of Horus quick tip on the armor, and I had strongly recommended in that video using a wet palette, especially if you're going to be because I was taking 4 colors to make that base color. And that's why I was recommending because if you saw in the video, you saw how much paint was lost during the process of highlighting and everything like that, versus if you have a wet palette, that paint would have lasted and gone a lot further, and you would have got a lot more marines done and stuff like that, right? And so his question is, it is a specific kind of palette, and there are a few videos out there. I believe we also have a video here on the site. If you just look it up, wet palette, on how to make a wet palette, and I've shown it even on my channel, showing making a wet palette for $4 Canadian, which is like, you know, 1 peso US. 1 peso US, peso Mexican. Anyway, yeah, so, you know, it's really cheap to make one, and essentially all you're doing is you're just laying an absorbing layer of something like a tissue paper or whatever, that, or a sponge that can absorb water. Not so much that it's soaking wet, but just that it's moist. And then you're laying parchment paper or wax paper, but typically it's parchment paper, on top of it. And what you're looking for is that moisture is wicking through the parchment paper, and it's keeping that paint layer from drying out. And that's all it is. That's all that a wet palette is. It's just a palette you're going to work from, that the paint, you can put your paint on it and it's not going to dry up on you right away. And it really, like, definitely would recommend everybody out there who's just getting started and wants to, you know, and even for people who's, you know, on a really restricted kind of budget, a wet palette is going to save you tons of money down the road, because again, you're going to be using up more and more of your paint. You're going to be using, like, if you put down, like, say 1 or 2 drops of paint, guaranteed you're going to use that all up. And if you're already using a palette, when you put two drops down on the model, sometimes you don't get to use it all. And so when you're using a wet palette, yeah, you end up using it all. And when you, especially if you're creating like color mixtures and stuff like that, very handy to keep that that alive and well, so that if you need to stop, you just close up the lid and, you know, go do something, take out the garbage, whatever, and come back, and it's still wet. And I've had my wet palette keep my paints wet for 7 days. 7 days it's kept my paints wet, and color mixtures right there. I mean, after a while, the moisture just kind of builds into the paint, and so it makes the paint a little bit thinner because there's more and more water crewing into the paint. Something to be mindful, but I mean, you know, the color mixture is still there. It's just really thin, and, you know, really thin paint isn't that bad. It's just you got to put more layers down. That's all, and it's not that big an issue, but for some it might be. So yeah, so KV or DK Vidal, hopefully that answers your question. It is a specific kind of palette. I definitely would recommend to pick one up and, you know, begin to use one, because it's in the long run, it's just going to save you money, and, you know, color mixtures and stuff like that, and you're just going to get the most out of your paint. And it really is what it is. You're going to get the most of your paint, and if you're a slow painter, it's definitely going to help you out. All right, so we got time for one more question. This is from Shirl's Night. Anyway. Kris, I use a lot of decals mainly because I have no faith in my talents at freehand. However, after watching your guides and a fair bit of practice, I am starting to get a bit more confident to go for it myself. I am having trouble with the Emperor's Children motif. Any chance at showing us a simple how-to in your amazing quick tip videos? Well, as luck would have it, yes. Expect the Emperor's Children coming up really soon in the quick tip series on doing these horse heresy models. Yeah, quick tips. Emperor's Children is next, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. We're gonna get quite a bit out of this Emperor's Children guy, because there's a lot of stuff you can do to these guys. So yeah, I do show a fairly easy way of doing the eagle wing motif, and also the squad number thing, and yeah, so expect that soon. We got time for one more. Master Shadow. Kris, what do you do to maintain your brushes? Do you suggest using brush conditioners? I find that as much as I try not to get paint into the top of the bristles, they still end up fraying and splitting. Any advice? Love your quick tips. You have inspired me to complete my armies. No more playing until they are complete. Okay, well, Master Channel. Yeah, the only thing I really do, okay, is, oops, is knock stuff over. Is this right here. Master's Brush Cleaner. This is really all I use all the time. And I've been using it for years. Works really, really great. And essentially all it is, you know, it's like a bar soap for your paintbrush. And when you have the paint on the brush and the bristles, okay, you dunk the brush into the water, your rinsing water, okay, give it a good rinse. Then hit the brush to the soap, not like, you know, smash it in there or anything like that, but work up a little lather very gently. And then often what I'll do is I'll go to my hand, and then I'll work the brush, you know, into the nook of my hand, just up and down, left and right, semicircular, whatever, just to work up a good lather on the bristles, and then rinse that off, okay, and then the brush should look relatively clean. And then what I'll do is, excuse me, is take the brush out of the water, and then onto the soap, I'll run it 2 or 3 times, kind of like one side, the other side, and then back in, maybe, you know. And then with my fingers, I'll draw that excess soap off, and very gently, and I'll pull the brush back to a point, and that's to condition it. And then I'll leave that on its side to dry. And then once it's dry, and you'll feel the bristles will feel a little bit firm, but that's fine, because what you're doing is you're conditioning those bristles to stay in that position. And, you know, also that thin little layer of the soap is protecting the bristles. It's not acidic or anything. It's not going to eat the bristles. It's not going to do anything, you know, funny to your bristles or anything like that. And yeah, so if you're using this stuff, if you do still find paint is getting up into the furrow, then you can use Brush Restore, and Vallejo sells a Brush Restore, and essentially it's like an alcohol based product. And essentially all you're doing is you're dipping the bristles and the furrow in just a little bit, not too far. You don't want to go past the crimp. And you're just dunking it in, letting it sit, and you can let it sit for like 24 hours. And it just starts dissolving away at that paint, not the bristles. And then you just come in, you just kind of rub the excess away, or you can use the soap again and do the same thing. And with this soap here, to come back to this guy again, with this, you could do the same thing as well. You can take the brush, okay, while it's still wet, rub it onto the soap, let it build up a lather up to the furrow, and it'll kind of look like, you know, like you have this big kind of white, you know, crusty thing sitting on the brush, and let it sit. And you can let it sit for, you know, hour or two, couple hours, and then rinse it off, and then you'll find that paint that was up by the furrow or in between the bristles and the furrow like that, you'll find that it kind of sloughs off as well. So that's another really good stuff. I like this stuff. But yeah, definitely would recommend, you know, going about it in that fashion with the brush soap. And if you need be, then the Brush Restore. I don't know what other companies produce Brush Restore. Something, because it's got to be a really gentle formula, because you don't want anything that's going to eat the bristles. That's really the main concern, is something that's so basically corrosive that it's going to eat the bristles. And bristles, I mean, like if it's synthetics, then it's not such a huge concern. But if you're using sable-haired bristles, then yeah, I mean, that's organic, and there's a lot of things that'll eat the bristles. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that. So, thank you for watching this segment here. Join me in the vault for another 30 minutes of answering vault questions and having a little bit of time there as well. Again, next week will be Steve, and so leave your questions below for Steve. Just have @Steve and then have your questions in there. And of course, if it's a response to something I've had in this video here today, then of course just have @Kris in there, and you know, I'll read it. I'll get to it eventually, sort of, kind of. But anyway, thank you for watching. Happy wargaming.